Have we got everyone back from lunch? Hello, everyone. We're about to embark on an hour. We're going to start with Satyan, and then we're going to introduce Tim Holland, and we're going to do a panel. But it should be a lively session. Satyan, thank you for coming.
Thanks.
It's amazing that we have the level of leadership and mic levels that we have today. Much better. Imagine that I just arrived in Asia, and I wasn't quite aware of some of the developments around sport and OTT and cricket and India. Can you just share with me some of the things that you're working with at the Times Internet?
Sure. So Times Internet is for those of you who don't know, it's a digital media company in India. We run a lot of different properties. And the most relevant thing that we've been doing in the last 3-4 years is that we acquired the digital rights for the Indian Premier League, which is the most prominent sporting event in India. One of the things that makes India very different from most markets that you'll have studied or understood is that India is really a one-sport market. The top 3 sports are cricket, 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 and beyond that, every other sport is viewed really as a niche more than anything else. And for us, it was a huge leap because we've never really had any involvement in sports monetization or sports rights management, and so we jumped in whole hog and bought the digital rights for the biggest event in India. In a country where digital is also very, very different than what it is in other markets. You've underpenetrated, lower bandwidth connectivity. It's a mobile-heavy market more than a web-heavy market. And so all of these dynamics have shaped a lot of the strategy that we've taken over the last 3 years and a lot of the learnings that we've developed.
Amazing. You said you acquired the rights for the India Premier League, the IPL. That was from 2011 to 2014?
Yep.
So this is coming into your 4th year.
Exactly.
What kind of insights have you discovered?
It's been a roller coaster, to say the least. Without going into too much, we'll talk about some of the most interesting things. One of the biggest learnings we figured out about India, and I think it actually is probably more applicable globally than people think, is that we all get very excited by HD streams and picture-in-picture and multi-camera angles and real-time integrated information, and it's all great, and we do all those things. But managing the connectivity and the baseline levels for the lowest common denominator is huge. So the first year we launched with IPL, we had a company out of LA help us build a player in a 7-day turnaround time and launch the property with a huge amount of consumption. And the player looked beautiful on my really nice connection at home. It looked great. But then when we looked at the statistics, we saw huge buffer rates, like 17-18% buffer rates, which meant that we really did a bad job for the lower connectivity user. And in India, there's a huge amount of people with 256 or 512 kbps connections. And so one of the fastest and most important learnings we figured out was that we should definitely do all the fancy HD multi-screen experience kind of things. But if we don't have the core offering really right, and if it doesn't load quickly and if it doesn't not buffer, everything else doesn't matter. And so we had to do a lot of optimization for the low end of the pyramid in terms of connectivity. Another interesting insight for us, which probably won't surprise people, but the growth that we see on mobile is much faster than we see on web. Both are growing very healthily in a time when IPL as a property on television has been maybe single digits growth. We've seen 30-40% year-on-year growth over the last 3-4 years. In this last season, we touched, I'd say about 30 or 35 million different visitors in a 2-month span. And if you compare that to, say, the monthly active users on ComScore, that's at least 30 to 50% of the population in India. So it's a really huge reach for a sporting property online. And I think it's, the other major thing that's really different about us is that the property is free. It has no authentication required, and it's readily available to basically anybody with a connection. And that's different from how most sports are, at least live distributed globally.
So you're serving an audience of tens of millions of viewers per tournament, and you're doing it in a commercial model that's somewhat different.
Yep.
How does that compare with other models in the market?
Yep.
What was the approach? Why did you actually say, we're going to offer this to India? Cricket is a beloved sport, and you're getting this incredible audience numbers, and you're doing it all for free.
Well, it's just an economic question, and it's just also more interesting in some ways. But So there's another large cricket rights in India, which is the rest of the boards for cricket, which a competitor of ours has, who is offered those on a paid model. And it's a pay for a series or pay for a 2-3 week or 1 month tournament. We've very consciously not taken that approach, mostly because the economics don't make sense. Payment is really difficult in India. The actual ability to collect money is very painful. And the truth is that today we see a lot of interest from advertisers that are spending meaningful amounts of money on our platform just because of the size of the audiences we aggregate. And when we compare that to what we can earn in terms of package or subscription revenues within India, it's not even close, to be honest. We earn far more. I mean, I think the projections on how many paying users we would have to be equivalent, we wouldn't get to maybe 10 or 20% of that. And so it's a very easy economic question for us to go free.
Interesting. You said that in the first year you went in a very fast track launch and got the player up and live. And then you actually began working with YouTube. How has that been?
Yep. So we've actually been working with YouTube for the last 3 years. And again, when you have a free live property, YouTube is a great partner to help distribute, help with the technology back end. And we've worked pretty closely with them over the last few years. The pros of it, great distribution, great access to a lot of people. Some of the challenges sometimes that YouTube is a really big company and they're dealing with things that are much bigger than what, for us, IPL is a huge thing in India, but for YouTube it's, a big thing amidst many, many, many big things. And so, I think overall we've been pretty happy with the partnership.
That's good. India is somewhat unique as a market, and the sports rights as a rights holder. Can you talk a bit about how the market approaches either bundling or separating, or how are you actually seeing the market developing in terms of owning rights?
So it's different. The IPL is a bit weird because the digital rights have been sold completely independently of the television rights. So there's a company that owns the TV rights through 2018. We own the digital rights through 2014, and next year the digital rights will come up for renewal, and somebody, maybe the TV guy or maybe us or maybe somebody else, will buy the digital rights next year for the next 4 years. It's a good question. I don't know if long-term rights will be sold disaggregated because audiences are not disaggregated. But India is a very different market. The connectivity levels that you have for television are so much bigger than digital that it doesn't really, the fear of cannibalization isn't relevant in India at all. There's really no risk of, when we grow our digital population, it's a very tall order to claim that it's coming at the expense of TV. It's really, for us, for example, one of our biggest areas of consumption is people in their offices. Right? So if you're at your office where you do have good connectivity, it's a very, very popular place for people to watch IPL. So we see, I think, on Fridays at 4:30, those matches are our most popular matches in terms of consumption as people get ready for the weekend, but before they've gone home where they would watch on television.
Okay, so you're saying that it's not just OTT or television. It's sort of adding new viewers and new times to the existing audience.
You just give access in more places, right? I mean, people love cricket. The more abilities and mechanisms they have to touch cricket, the more they'll do it. I mean, it's a very simple equation that way.
Other than office time, isn't there also a phenomenon that occurs later in the evening with cricket viewership on OTT?
No, there's a lot of really funny insights we've learned. So one of them is that in homes, in the evenings when there's like the serial or the soap opera kind of shows, the wife wants to watch that, so that takes over television, and then the husband goes and watches it on IPL, online on our site. That's something we've seen a lot of happening. We've seen a huge uptick in mobile consumption as well, and the amazing thing is that in India, there are 7 times more 2G users than 3G users, right? So it's really, despite the fact that we have a huge mobile base, the connectivity levels are still very immature. And despite that, even on 2G, we're seeing huge levels of consumption. So again, it comes back to that original point. If you're able to handle low broadband and low connectivity streaming experiences, there's a huge base of people that are interested in it, at least in India.
So it's growing.
It's huge, yeah.
Yeah, mobile in India, I think, is an amazing opportunity for longer form or at least dip in and dip out content.
Yeah. On mobile, we had an average of, I think, 20 minutes per session of consumption, which it doesn't make sense to me, frankly. But my guess is that there's a lot of users that are consuming it for 3, 4, 5 minutes, but then there are a lot of users who are watching entire matches where they maybe don't have easy access to a television, or if you're a driver in a car who's on call and you're sort of watching on your phone because that's the only outlet you have. There's just a lot of different use cases that you find in a country that's very mobile-centric.
That's amazing. Working with YouTube, it enables you to do a lot of social integration with media streaming. Yep. How has that been working?
So we've had a good relationship with YouTube where we distribute on YouTube as well as on our own property. And so we've played with a lot of different things, right? So we have real-time Twitter integration, and in the first year, I remember we integrated Facebook comments, and at one point we're seeing about a comment a second during a match. So really large amounts of discussions. In the last year, we did a really close integration with YouTube around the Google Hangouts, and we brought commentators on board and talked to people before and after the match. And so, there was a question about how important are pre-shows and post-shows. The things you can do on digital there are far more interesting because they can be really interactive. And that's something we're hopefully going to leverage even more in the year to come.
I'm going to ask you more about that during the panel. Satyan, what do you think is going to drive you to renew? If you look at the next few years coming up, you've got the next 12 months, you've got a great tournament coming up.
Yep.
What do you think is your lean forward strategy for this going into 15, 16, 17?
So when you've got a monopoly sport like cricket in India, the rights do not come cheap. Making a large amount of profit against very expensive rights is extremely difficult. And so it's important that, at least for us, when we decided to get into it, we were very clear that this is an investment area that's going to help us in a few different ways. One is that we're going to leverage it to build out other properties of relevance to consumers. So last year, we have a long-form video streaming platform in India called Box TV. And we put IPL on Box TV, and that helped us create a new user base for a new product we were launching. We'll do some interesting things with it this year as well. But second, and it's a generic mandate, you can say, but for us, our mandate is to be wherever our consumers are. And the truth is that being associated with and having an exclusive right of something like IPL is hugely relevant for us to be relevant for our consumers. We have news destinations, we've got music, we've got a number of different things that we run, but cricket is cricket. And if you want to be relevant for this side of consumer audiences, it just puts you in a different league with your consumer, I think.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
Well, we've got a panel, so I'm sure it's not final thoughts. But no, I think that if there's one message I would really want to convey, it's that India is a very different story. I'd encourage all of you to just study it a little bit because as much as it's maybe less mature than a lot of other markets, what we've learned about India is that there's really different markets in India. There are the people who want the flashy tablet second screen experience and the HD streaming and whatnot, and you have to accommodate that. But there is also a huge audience that's different from that. And understanding the demographics of your audiences and realizing that it's not just the ones that we like to talk about, but it's really a lot more than that sometimes is an important thing when it comes to driving numbers at the end of the day.
Excellent. Thank you. Satyan, it's an honor to meet you. Thank you so much for being here today. Can I get a hand for Satyan?